All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for making the time to join us this morning. I see people filtering in, so give people a couple minutes just to come into the room. As you're coming in, would love for you to respond to this question in the chat along with your name and your institution. Finish the sentence. As we plan for the next academic year, the biggest AI question on my campus is, what are you all talking about? That's what we want to know. All right. So it seems that we've got everyone in the room now. So I'll just go ahead and get us started. I'm Mylene Duong. I'm the Chief Impact Officer here at the Constructive Dialogue Institute, and my job is to help our team build evidence-based programs and to ensure that they're working the way that they were designed to. And I'll be moderating today's conversation. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We will be sending out the slides and a recording after this webinar to everyone who's registered. We'll have some time for the panelists to answer a few questions at the end. We'll try to take some clarifying questions after each speaker. And as the questions occur to you, go ahead and put them into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You don't have to wait until the Q&A portion. Putting them into the Q&A will allow other people to upvote and for us to be able to see your questions and figure out which ones will have the broadest interest. So let me introduce you to our two panelists today. Brian, if you want to go ahead to go into the panelist slide. Today's conversation is really going to be about, can AI actually teach students constructive dialogue skills? And we have two of my favorite colleagues here on the call today. We'll hear first from Dr. Ryan Carlson. And Ryan is a behavioral scientist, and his work focuses on motivation, morality, and constructive dialogue. His recent research interest is on how AI tools can help people navigate disagreement more effectively. He earned his PhD in social psychology from Yale. He's held research positions at Stanford and the University of Chicago. And he was also the lead author on a recent publication, which was entitled, Can AI Teach Dialogue Skills to College Students?, which reveals some really fascinating answers. Thanks for being here, Ryan. And then we'll hear from Dr. Jake Fay. Jake is an educator with deep experience teaching and studying civic discourse. And prior to joining CDI, he was a fellow at the University of California's National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement and Harvard University's Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics. He's taught at Harvard College, at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and also in middle schools, as I remember. Jake led the development of Perspectives with Personalized Practice, which is CDI's own AI-powered tool for dialogue. And he'll tell us about what that tool is, how they developed it, and how it works. Thanks for being here, Jake. All right, so with all of that, without further ado, let me hand it over to Ryan to kick us off. Ryan, tell us about your white paper and what you found.
Sure thing. Thanks, Mylene. So today I'm going to talk about our white paper, Can AI Teach Dialogue Skills to College Students? And this is a big, timely question, right? This is a crucial moment because AI's presence in higher ed is growing fast. And in this paper, we pulled all the research that we found to date. And today I'm going to talk about those findings. So all the research findings you'll see on the subsequent slides are inside this paper. You'll see a link to it in the chat, and I'll have a QR code to it later in the discussion as well. So 2026 is an inflection point. Two big things are happening at once. One, polarization is near historic highs. People are divided not just over their values, but basic facts. And at the same time, AI is rapidly reshaping higher ed. A 2026 survey found that 4,000 students and faculty are already, of 4,000 students and faculty found that already 95% are using AI on campus. Yet at the same time, only 1 in 4 institutions has a formal policy that's governing that use. And this is important because it means that the question is now for higher ed, not whether to embrace AI on campus, but how to shape its use. So AI is everywhere now, and division is growing. And at the intersection of these two forces is a question. Can AI help students build constructive dialogue skills and thus prepare them to be the next generation of leaders that could bridge the divides that we face today? First, I want to name a couple barriers that students face to engaging in dialogue. The first is that it's risky, right? There are huge social risks that come with dialogue, and they can seem like they outweigh the perceived benefits. You can imagine a student in a seminar on a discussion about something like Gaza, and they might just not feel like comfortable sharing their view. They might think it'll cost them friends. Silence might feel safer. A second barrier is that practice is scarce. It can be hard to find anyone to disagree with. We tend to cluster with like-minded peers. This phenomenon is known as homophily. An intuition for it is the phrase, birds of a feather flock together. And as a result, on campus, it might be difficult for students to find someone to actually have a conversation across differences. And the last is that dialogue takes deliberate practice, but most students don't actually get structured guidance and feedback on how to use dialogue skills. Dialogue is like building any skill. It comes gradually with guidance and feedback, just like you would have for an athlete or a musician, but students often don't get that structured practice. So each of these barriers is actually an opportunity that we see for AI. So there are risks that come with having conversations across differences, but AI can offer low stakes spaces for people to practice without anyone watching. So this removes this social risk that drives avoidance. It can feel like there are scarce opportunities on campus. AI offers the opportunity for simulated disagreement, allowing people to be exposed to views that they might never encounter on campus. And lastly, most importantly, this barrier of not having deliberate practice is also something that AI can address by offering structured, personalized practice. And it can do this at scale, reaching thousands of students. And the way it does this is through something called deliberate practice, where skills are broken down into component parts. Students are given feedback on each of those elements of a skill to improve their ability to use those skills in the future.
Ryan,
Yeah.
let me just interrupt you. So we are getting a question in the chat. People saying that they can't hear you. Maybe just speak a little bit more loudly. I can hear you just fine, but speak a little bit more loudly than you typically would. See if that helps.
Okay. Yeah. I will do my
Yeah,
best.
that's louder. Thanks.
Okay. So we see three specific roles that AI can play in dialogue. I'm going to quickly intro both of them, and then I'm going to dig in deeper. So the first is that AI can play the role of a coach, where it is working with students privately to build skills through practice and real-time feedback. So here the role it's playing is that of a personal trainer for dialogue. And it's the most constrained role because it is a role where you could have an educator just drill a specific practice scenario. So the student is given a specific task and the coach is responding to a very specific input. So it's constrained in how it interacts with the student. And as a result of that, we think it's the lowest risk. The second role that AI can play is as a mediator. So here its function is to facilitate dialogue between humans. The difference that's really important to highlight is that now it sits between two real people, and its role is to prompt elaboration, surface agreement. It offers no opinions of its own, and as a result, we see it as a moderately constrained role. And with that comes moderate risks. And the third role that we talk about in the white paper is AI as a conversation partner. And here AI is playing the opponent. It's generating arguments in real time, and it's responding dynamically as it has a conversation with a student across divides. And as a result of this, we see it as the most risky role because it's the least constrained. In order for the AI to be able to respond adaptively to whatever the student is saying in a conversation, it needs to have a lot of flexibility in its ability to respond. And across these three roles, we see a cross-cutting insight, which is that the less constrained the role, the higher the risk, right? The bigger the role we hand to AI, the more risk we take on. With a coach, it's a tightly constrained role. We tell it what to look for and how to respond inside a pre-designed exercise. A conversation partner is the opposite. To feel real, it responds dynamically and unpredictably. We can't script it. So the less we can constrain it, the more ways it can go wrong. And I will go into each of those now. So let's dig into AI as a coach. So its primary role is to privately skill build through targeted practice and real-time feedback. So as a result, its purpose is strictly pedagogical. It teaches students how dialogue skills work, it prompts reflection, it withholds answers. And the evidence so far that we're seeing is quite encouraging. There's research showing gains in language learning, in empathic communication, in academic outcomes, and in interpersonal skill mastery through interacting with a coach. And there are some risks that come with AI coaches, but so far we see those risks to be manageable. Right? They have to do mostly with the design of AI. So over scaffolding is just this risk that you might have too much structure in an activity that makes it difficult when that is removed for someone to use that skill. Illusions of understanding have come up in a lot of recent work. And this is just the risk that by interacting with a coach, one might come away more confident than they should be about how they'd be able to use that skill in an actual conversation. And the last risk that we name is tone policing, which is that there's a risk that AI coaches could just be too rigid in what they think is the right way to communicate dialogue, and it doesn't fully capture the diversity of the way that people can express constructively. So the key dependency in AI coaches is that they have deliberate pedagogical design. And there's a really important study by Bastani et al. In 2025 that illustrates this. They found that students using a generic off-the-shelf AI, GPT-4, ended up doing worse on exams than those that used a purpose-built tool by educators. So even though it was the same underlying tech, they saw different results. And the key distinction was the design. The second role we discussed in the white paper is AI as a mediator. Its function here is to steer the process of dialogue between real people. So it doesn't contribute its own viewpoints. It attempts to keep people on the rails as they have a conversation across lines of difference. And the early evidence that we talk about in the paper is quite promising. It shows that one-on-one AI mediation improves both people's self-reported understanding of the person they had a conversation with across differences, as well as their openness to having an additional conversation. But at the same time, AI mediators come with risks. So one is dependency, right? The conversation might go well while there's a mediator present, but there's a risk that students might never learn why it went well, and they won't be able to implement it by themselves next time. The second is that when an AI is a mediator, it's the arbiter of truth. So mediators sometimes might check facts live. AI tools that are playing this role seem to have this function in many cases. But with this is the risk that, as we have probably all encountered, AI can be confidently wrong, especially on contested topics. It can use incomplete information, and thus this is an important risk for us to reckon with. Third, is a risk of false equivalency. So in pursuit of chasing common ground, there is a risk that AI can treat, on one hand, a solid position based in facts, and a position on the other hand that is not based in any evidence as equal. And lastly is oversight, right? So live conversations across differences can sometimes go off the rails. And there's a risk if an AI is playing the role of mediator that with something, as heated as a conversation about Israel Palestine, about who's going to step in if things get out of hand. And that's why we think it's important to have a human ready to intervene. And the third role we talk about is AI as a conversation partner. So this is the role where it plays a flight simulator. It allows us to practice high stakes conversations without the social cost. It is, to my mind, the most intuitive and appealing role that AI could play to help students learn to have conversations across divides. But it also, as the evidence shows, comes with the most risks, and these risks go beyond pedagogy. The most important one that I want to name comes from a study done by Costello and colleagues in 2024. It's published in Science. And what they found when they had AI had a conversation with conspiracy theorists, and it took the AI took the opposing view as the conspiracy theorists. In 3 turns in that conversation, it was able to durably reduce conspiracy beliefs by 20%. And this effect lasted for up to 2 months. The risk is that AI can do this in any direction. So subsequent studies have shown that, including from this research group, that AI can also increase people's beliefs in conspiracy theories. So, right, there's a huge, thing to reckon with here of how much power we want to give AI to do persuasion and dialogue. A second risk that comes with AI conversation partners is caricature reinforcement. So AI is trained on the internet, which tends to skew to the extreme. So students, when they're practicing with an AI conversation partner, have the risk of encountering a cartoon version of their opponents and ending up with perhaps a false belief of what those people are actually like. Another risk is the realism gap. So AI has no lived experience, it has no stakes. So it is not fully preparing us for the richness of real disagreement. And the kicker is that we find evidence that practice without feedback doesn't transfer. So even when you have a conversation with an AI, it doesn't seem to build skill. Only when you have feedback from a coach after those interactions does it actually contribute to skill building. So it seems like having a partner on its own is not enough. So again, we see this key insight across these 3 different roles is that the less constrained the role AI plays in dialogue, the higher the risks seem to be. So that's a matter of degree, but there's also a really important point to make about the kinds of risks, right? So with an AI coach, the risks are primarily about learning, they're about pedagogy. With a AI mediator, they extend to our relationships with other people. And lastly, with a conversation partner, they can sway people's opinions to the extent that they could affect voting and public opinion. And as a result, we find that the evidence suggests that coaching is where we have the clearest evidence of strong benefits and the most addressable risks. So I want to end with some practical recommendations for deploying AI responsibly. One is that we think starting with AI coaching is a natural place to begin because the evidence is strongest to date and the risks seem to be most manageable. 2, expand cautiously to AI mediation only with the right safeguards in place for live conversations. 3, hold conversation partners to a higher bar. we think it makes sense to wait until the research shows the benefits clearly justify the risks. And four, opt for purpose-built tools with pedagogical guardrails. This matters the most because students already use AI, so inaction is no longer an option, right? Students will be using AI without guardrails no matter what. So we think it's important for campuses to be proactive. And I'm dropping a QR code here to the white paper if you want to learn more about any of the things I just discussed. All of the papers and the references are in there.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Before we go to Jake, there's a few clarifying questions in the chat. Thank you so much to everybody who is putting their questions into the Q&A. Please continue to put your questions into the Q&A rather than the chat. It is easier for me as the moderator to track them when they're in the Q&A box. So one question for you before we move on. Somebody said, I'm having trouble picturing what AI as a mediator practically looks like. Can you describe like how that works in practice?
For sure, yeah. A recent use case that we've followed closely involves integrating a AI mediator into a chat room where two students are having a conversation across differences. So they're paired up based off of disagreement inside of a classroom, and they have a conversation inside of this chat. And what the mediator does is it basically is tasked with one, making sure that the information is accurate, the statements that people are making, and primarily two, keeping the conversation on the rails. So finding common grounds, highlighting that, and if people are deviating from that, encouraging them to come back to the common ground.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much for that. So I'm actually good for the sake of time. I'm going to move us on to Jake's presentation. There are tons of questions in the Q&A, so many interesting questions, but I want you both to have the opportunity to answer them both. So Jake, can you tell us a little bit about how Ryan's research has informed the development of perspectives with personalized practice?
Absolutely. Um, yeah, so the first thing I'd like to say is this research paper was instrumental in shaping how we set out to build AI into perspectives, what we call perspectives with personalized practice. So what does that even mean, right? We think of personalized practice as an integrated feature in perspectives that replaces select static activities, such as multiple choice questions or free response text boxes, that we often joke students would type things in and it just drifts away into the virtual ether without getting any feedback. Personalized practice replaces those things with real-time skill practice and adaptive feedback. So this fits squarely within the coach archetype that Ryan was describing. So we are very happy to report that we do like to follow our own guidelines that our researchers set out for us on the design team. Students respond to dialogue scenarios and receive immediate specific feedback on what they did well, what they missed, and how to improve. All right. You can see this is a little screenshot on the left side here about what this starts to look like. And don't worry, you're going to get a full-on picture in a little bit. So let me give you a little bit more context. We can move on to the next slide, Ryan. So again, I just want to touch back to some of the research that Ryan shared, right? Why did we lean into this? Partly is the learning science, right? As the research report showed, self-reflection alone rarely provides the clarity needed for skill development, right? So when students are typing things into a text box, thinking even carefully and deeply about something and trying to generate a response, if they don't get feedback on it, it's not sinking in and setting in the same way that we want, right? So structured feedback loops are more effective in teaching a new skill or information. The second thing comes out of partner insights. We heard across these focus groups and feedback that we collect all the time that learners wanted more specific feedback on their responses to the scenarios and examples throughout perspectives, right? Am I saying this right? Was a very common refrain. So we can move on. And we totally sympathize with that, right? I've already mentioned this a couple times, but it can be really frustrating to struggle with a response to a difficult scenario and receive a static response that just is like, oh man, everybody got that same language, even though my response was totally different from Mylene or Ryan's, right? So that's where personalized practice, right, shines, right? In this design question for us became, how could we build the context, expertise, and experience of CDI's researchers, designers, and facilitators into the personalized responses that were being provided by AI, right? Um, so to truly check that we were doing this, we went to the experts. We hired a group of 25 students and recent grads to interact with the AI tools that we were developing as we were doing it, in good faith and also in bad faith. One of their assignments was actually to try to jailbreak what we were building. And we would give them $100 if they were successful. But our point in doing this was to anticipate their behaviors, right? The positives, the true mistakes, and the attempts to break the tool. And as we worked with students and saw what they were doing and were iterating on these tools, we learned a lot, including a couple things just that I'll highlight, right? First, what happens when a learner responds in entirely different language? Well, the agent, we found out, responds back in the learner's language. Very cool. But what sort of downstream effects does that have on our ability to assess quality? We ended up making a design decision, at least for now, that personalized practice sticks to English because we offer perspectives in English and our quality controls are all set up to work in English. But maybe someday this update will happen. I don't know. It's really cool to just see that happen on the fly, right? Um, the second thing was that we discovered how the skills we teach can be broken down into more discrete, measurable, and accessible pieces, right? Ryan mentioned this earlier, but we found that the more specific we could get, the better we found we could deliver feedback. So we dug into these skills and looked at the component speech acts that take place whenever you ask a curious question, use looping, or respond to a story. The better we could get, we could identify those pieces of a skill, the finer feedback we could get, right? So on the back end, that looks like a coaching matrix, which you actually see a snapshot of on the other side of the screen. This one actually is for constructive questions. So when personalized practice for constructive questions assesses a question that a learner poses in response to a prompt, they're looking to see if it has a characteristic of being truly curious, or is it being rhetorical? Is it open-ended rather than closed, i.e., is it giving something that you can respond to in many ways versus a yes/no answer? And does it explore experience? Does it invite people to share why they think what they think or where their beliefs or opinions come from? And that allows us to actually give the learner a lot of different feedback. Hey, this is a pretty good question, right? You're working on it, but you could do more. You could make it more open-ended. You could actually try to invite their experience and their why they believe what they believe into this question to really get them to open up and speak back to you, right? So that's what it looks like on the back end when you see this coaching matrix. But on the front end, let's just show you. So we can move on, and we're going to check out a video actually here of personalized practice in action. So a couple things before we start it. First, this is for the skill of looping, right? You'll notice that the prompt is up in the left corner of the screen. So the prompt here is asking students to respond to another student who says, whenever I talk about my experiences with race, people shut down. It feels like they do not want to hear about it, right? So you can see that on the upper left corner of a sidebar that we designed to keep a bunch of relevant and important information there for the learner as they work through practicing this skill of looping.
Hold
All
on a
right.
minute, Jake. Sorry to interrupt you. I am not seeing the video play.
We are about to start playing the
Got
video.
it. Sorry.
I just wanted to give people a couple pointers. And as the video plays, look how we name the components of the skill up front as part of the learning objectives, and then how the feedback drives towards these same components as it provides feedback to this learner who struggles a little bit. Oh, that cut out. But you could see that actually that they were successful in the third attempt, which is this was a somewhat staged example actually, but one of the things to note is that this does have a limit, so students can't get caught in an endless loop of trying to practice this. They will get feedback that gets up to this third attempt that really tries to help them drive them towards improving these various components, right? In this case, you saw them struggling with the restatement and then forgetting to put in the check at the end. So this identified those different component pieces and pushed the student to try to put them in place or refine and make them a little bit more specific and clear. But that's our personalized practice in action.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jake. Brian, you can stop your screen sharing now, and we will go to some questions. There are a bunch of questions in the chat and in the Q&A. I think what I'm sensing is there's a lot of people still grappling with how they feel about AI ethically. And I think we'll have some insights, but we can't really make your ethical decisions for you. We can tell you what it is that we know, and how you can kind of think through the risks and the benefits based on what we know from the science. One note, Ryan, is that your sound is still low. So as you're speaking, just like hold that microphone like right up to. Yeah. Um, and just to get one question off the bat, we will be sharing the slides and a recording of this webinar. You'll see an email that goes out to everybody who registered. Watch out for that email. The white paper is already available online. I'm hoping our colleague who's in the audience, Natalie, can put that link into the chat for you all. And then somebody asked about where can we find the evidence that Ryan is talking about. It is in the reference section of that white paper. So every paper that Ryan described, every experiment Ryan described will be in the reference section of the white paper that you download. All right, here comes the interesting questions. All right, so this first one is really about, I think, data integrity and data protections. I'll just read it. And so by using AI for dialogue, are we encouraging the false sense students have that talking to AI is without risk? They're being watched, but by corporations. Can we ensure with integrity that student data will remain their own while using AI in these exercises? So a sticky question there.
Yeah, that's such a
All
good
right.
question. Oh, you want to take this, Jake?
I can take this, Ryan. I think both of us have thought a lot about this, and this was part of the entire design process. So feel free to jump in. I'll share a couple things. The first thing is that we try to make the data that when students enter things into these personalized practices, the first thing is it is personally identifiable information, are not linked to the transcripts of these things at all, right? We store de-identified chat transcripts at CDI simply to monitor the activity's performance. We do not train our models on student data. And instructors actually cannot even see the student chat interactions or activity content, right? I think this is a really important thing. We we don't want students feeling as if you can just share whatever it is to AI. And so we've put a lot of things in place to kind of protect them from that. We do, the OpenAI does have policies on data handling, and we do use their API to generate responses. But again, these are not used to train or improve OpenAI models, right? It's not improving ours. It's not improving OpenAI. And OpenAI retains API inputs and outputs for about 30 days for service and abuse monitoring, but that's distinct from data training, right? So a lot of what we're doing is we're looking to make sure that the models are working correctly, but we're not using and feeding that data back in ways that is exploitive of the work and learning that students are trying to do.
Thanks so much for that, Jake. Anything you want to add, Ryan?
It was such a big question. I would just say that I hope it was clear in my presentation that we see AI as a means to an end of dialogue between humans. So if it's not doing that effectively, then it's not worth it. And that's why we run experiments. We look at the science to make sure that it is worthwhile to utilize AI to help people speak to each other across divides. And so far, the evidence seems to be suggestive that at least in some roles, uh, the benefits outweigh the risks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ryan. So I want to just like pause on this point a little bit because I think this distinction between like the data that we keep or the data that OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, keeps, and the data and what it means to like use the data for training is like not super intuitive to people who don't understand like the back end. Um, so like, I don't know, like let's work together to kind of like make this distinction clear, right? So
Yep.
we keep and OpenAI, it seems like keep sort of like text input that like if I'm chatting with ChatGPT or they're keeping that text input for 30 days, right?
Yeah.
But they're not then using that text input. They're monitoring that text input for abuse,
Yeah.
right? To make sure that their ChatGPT is safe. But then they're not using that as though it's like a feed of an input into their models. They're not using that in order to do further development of ChatGPT. Is that
Yeah.
sort of a correct way to
I,
say
I
that?
think I think you can look at it as they're monitoring outputs, and that data does not then become another input. It is not put back into the system. It is outputted, and we're looking at it to make sure that there's nothing wrong with what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, that is
Okay.
a really important distinction that the data is not being used to train OpenAI's models. But student data, when we look at it on our ends in secure databases, allows us to make sure that personalized practice is working effectively.
Yeah. And we're not linking that to we're stripping students in identifying information when we store their student input. And when we're saying we're looking at it to make sure that it's working effectively, we're looking at things like is the coach picking up, it's our AI tool picking up the right things, is it giving appropriate feedback? It's everybody being safe when using the AI tool. Okay, so that was a big question. Hopefully that's clear. It took me a heck of a long time to understand what all that means and why it's important. So the next question is about this is also a sticky one. There are a lot of sticky questions with AI. So the potential for social cost seems essential to me as part of the learning process. So trying to minimize the discomfort is problematic to me. Shouldn't we be trying to help students through the discomfort and risk rather than trying to remove it?
That's a really good question. You can't remove the discomfort fully from a live disagreement, but you can give students skills to prepare them for that discomfort and to understand how to navigate it. And I see that as more the angle we take is helping students feel equipped when they show up to a difficult conversation where emotions can run high rather than uh, ignoring that fact. That is a reality of difficult conversations. And AI, when it's in a coaching role, can help someone show up for that conversation more confident.
Yeah. I think about it in terms of agency, right? We want students to have choices when they enter into those difficult moments in a conversation, right? The hardest time to practice new skills is in those difficult moments, right? I'm on top of being a teacher, I am a lifelong athlete. So I think about this in terms of putting reps in the gym, right? You want to practice in contained circumstances so that when it actually the rubber hits the road, you're ready for it, right? So the goal isn't to actually take away discomfort. It's to give students tools and options and the ability to make choices when they start to notice this conversation is getting really difficult. I really don't like what that person just said to me. How can I respond? Right now we see a lot of knee-jerk reactions, things like that. But this is trying to give students more choices, more agency, and give them opportunities to practice those things before they walk in and have to test them out in the hardest moments.
Right. Like if I'm learning to juggle, maybe I want to learn to juggle alone before I have to go on stage and juggle.
100%. Otherwise, you're going, I was like, are you going to just drop all those balls, right? Yeah, totally.
Okay, so this is, I think, maybe more of a question for Ryan. Say more about how you arrived at the assessment that AI as a mediator carries lower risk than AI as a conversation partner. And this comes from like the specialized training that's required of human mediators. So the high level of risk that comes with untrained or incompetent mediators can really cause harm. So this would seem like a potentially riskier application than a conversation partner.
That's a super good point. And I would say I would go back to the argument that I make in the paper that while that is true, and while I don't think the distance in the risk between coach to mediator to conversation partner is evenly spaced. I think that there's a big jump from coach to mediator, and it sits not too far away in my mind from a conversation partner. The reality is that the ways in which things can go wrong are, at least in the evidence so far, suggesting that a conversation partner can do a lot more potential harm. The mediator role is, even though it is certainly difficult, and this is why we signpost that like it would be best to have a human mediator on standby, making sure that if things go off the rails, they can step in. We do not think that AI can fully replace a human facilitator. We actually invest deeply in human facilitators, and we have training for human facilitators at CDI. But that role in a conversation is ultimately more constrained than the role of playing the opposite number. And again, the persuasion research, the power of those effects, how durable they are, that to me uh, leads to more concerns, more risk at a societal level than what we see in mediators. But there's certainly risks in mediators. I think all of the ones we name are important.
Thanks for that, Ryan. Okay, so that gets a question of like why, if there are risks, like why do this at all? So somebody asked, I'm interested in the merits of AI specifically for growing soft skills. Is AI really necessary or better for this than other methods? I'll let you just answer that one.
Sure. Yeah. Um, I'll start by saying, I mean, the evidence, I say this in the paper, say it here, is young. There's a lot of research that is under review right now that's actively being conducted that is going to clarify the answers to these questions. But the initial evidence suggests that for things like interpersonal skill mastery, that seems pretty relevant to the space you're thinking about. It can lead to benefits, immediate post-outcome benefits. And that makes sense to me. I mean, it's valuable as a starting point. It reduces the friction to just jumping in and practicing because it's right. It's on your phone. It's on your computer. It's easy to get going if you have like a coach that is able to support you in learning these skills.
Can I add something here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
So I think I think one of the things I would say is I don't want this to dissolve into an either or, right? This is not either AI or human instruction or human, like, I think one of the things that when Ryan and I and our team was working on this, one of the long conversations was how do we create an AI tool that supports human skill development and human interaction. It doesn't replace it, and it doesn't become a crutch for how difficult some of the things that we have to talk about and work with each other about are. So I think when Ryan's talking about there are benefits, like why we came back to this idea of AI providing coaching. is that again, it's not supplanting or replacing human interaction and the things we have to do. It is merely giving us another place to try out and practice some of these things that um, you know, it can feel awkward doing this when you role play this stuff in with other people. It may feel a little less awkward when you're like, I know I know I'm in a practice mode because this is AI. And so don't let it become an either or. And I think that, as Ryan was saying, there are benefits that can lead to the ultimate aims that we want around how we're interacting with each other.
I love that. Thank you for adding that, Jake. And I will just say, if working with an AI coach isn't leading to better conversations with actual people, it's not serving its role. Like, it is a means to that end.
Thanks so much for that. Okay, so let's just stay on this theme of like technology and human interaction and the roles that those two could play. Lots of questions about this in the Q&A. Um, one is like somebody asked variants of this, but so after a student has built strong dialogue skills with AI, how can how can we, staff members, faculty, help them to take those skills and then transition them to real life conversations?
Ooh, this seems like a question that's just well made for me. Uh, I think there's a couple ways. One, learn them yourselves and model them, right? Two, name them when they're being used in a classroom or a co-curricular setting, right? Three, use them yourselves in your meetings and your engagement with your colleagues and peers so that it becomes just more of second nature. And make room for mistakes and growth because we are not great at these things. We when we get very angry, when we get put off, it's hard to come back to these things. So like make space for talking about at CDI and many of our live programs we'll talk about it as talking about talking. Make space for talking about talking so that you can actually reflect on I noticed that you had a moment to use looping, but you didn't. You went in with an accusation. What do you think would have been different if you tried something in that moment slightly differently, right? Like create spaces for having those types of conversations, and see, as Ryan has said, like this is a beginning. This is not a final product. The goal is to take these and translate it by actually bringing it explicitly into the spaces that we create on our campuses.
Yeah, that's I that's great. I will just add that you can build this into your curriculum, right? You can have a dialogue at the end of the semester with your students that gives them a chance to use these skills. If you're a an RA in a dorm, you can hold a space for students to have a conversation where they can utilize those skills, put them to work. Um, if you are a runner of an institute on campus, you can host an event where students can come and have a dialogue about an important pressing issue.
Let me give you one story too about this. So I was working with a group of college students. We were teaching them a bunch of these conflict navigation skills, looping in particular, and we would pause a conversation and note like, "Hey, you just used it. Great." And a lot of students were like, "This felt really cheesy. It felt kind of artificial that we were trying to use these skills." But then one of the students, a couple sessions later, came in and said that she in her work outside of campus, in her pre-professional work, there were all sorts of conflicts happening, and she found herself using the skills, and she was like, it just started happening, and I was like, and then I realized that how kind of silly it was in the context of a classroom and this workshop that we were doing this. It actually then made sense when I had to use it more naturally, and it didn't feel arbitrary and silly and stupid because we were actually putting in the reps and practicing in ways that felt a little weird. And then it gets into real life and it's like I just used it. It just was there. And that's exactly what Ryan and I are talking about and really hoping that this type of work with AI providing coaching can lead to.
Okay, fantastic. So we have just a few minutes left in our webinar. I want to there's some very practical questions I want to get to. One person asked, like, can you talk a little bit about how students respond knowing that they're practicing with AI instead of another person? And does that change how seriously they engage with the exercise? Have we learned anything through our development efforts?
We have initial data that
Hey, Ryan,
student,
louder.
oh,
Sorry.
sorry. Um, the trends we're seeing initially are that students are putting in more effort. Having AI on the other ends. So in Perspectives, our online learning program, students before would practice skills by typing them into a free response box. There's nothing on the other side. And with like an AI with personalized practice that can respond and give feedback on the components of the skills that were used correctly, the ones that were used incorrectly, and how to improve. Um, Students, one, appear to be putting in more effort, and two, they respond to the feedback. They convert from an incorrect attempt at using that skill to a correct one at an impressive rate. So both of those signals together suggest that students are engaging in good faith and meaningfully with AI.
So next very concrete question is, are the AI agents words alone? So might an agent use emojis or emulate possible emotional responses? An actual person in dialogue might have something, might have to something the student says or asks.
That's such a good question. That's that's a challenge for the future. Dialogue involves heated emotions, real tangible human emotions, and it's difficult to simulate that with AI. On our end right now, we, as you saw in Jake's demo, primarily work in text, right? And text carries some emotion, but it is certainly not the whole picture of what it feels like to be in a dialogue with another person. So I would say cautiously that that's something that we want to address ultimately in the future because it's really important. We did spend some time uh, working with voice-enabled AI, so people can use their words instead of typing into a text box. And we ultimately did not find a product we were happy with and thought was secure enough to move forward with. But that would be one potential step towards that richness is to have people using their voice and hearing a voice that has like prosody and emotion in it.
Jake, anything to add there? You
I
have
would
a
just also,
serious face on, so.
when do I not have a serious face on? Uh, the other thing Ryan's point on the emotionality and the fact that that has to be a part of dialogue. It's not putting it to the side. In the way that we are using AI to provide coaching, the AI actually doesn't need to have the same level of emotionality. Like it might be able to note, like, it sounds like you're frustrated in this response, right? Or it sounds like you're trying to move on pretty quickly. But the AI when it's providing coaching, doesn't have to do the same level of emotional work that we would expect if you move all the way into AI providing conversation partner work, right?
Yeah.
That's where I think you look at like, yeah, if it can't replicate that cleanly and clearly, how are you going to actually do this in a way that is a good form of practice? Um, so that's another reason why we've kept our work at the how can we make this as a strong and useful coach?
So I'll end with just this last question, which is, where do we access the tools? Is it on the website? Is it implemented as any part of CDI's programming?
You want to take this one, Jake?
So our latest version of undergraduate perspectives has these built into it. I believe we have a demo up on this. Is that correct, Mylene?
We don't have a demo up, but if you get in touch with our growth team, they can connect you. So it's at growth@constructivedialogue.org. is how you can get more information about how to bring this onto your campus. And then I'm sure my colleague Natalie, so if you guys haven't noticed, we don't actually have this access to the chat here. My colleague Natalie will very helpfully put in growth@constructivedialogue.org into the chat box. But as of right now, we don't have a standalone practice tool. It is integrated as part of a student curriculum.
Yeah.
Right.
And it is actually, it's only part of our undergraduate curriculum because we tuned these coaches to work primarily for that context. And that's, again, I think just one last note to put on how much we have been paying attention to the security and the stability of the AI agents that we were developing.
Well, thank you so much. We're at the end of our time. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you all of you for coming and engaging fully with this webinar. So much to think and talk about when it comes to AI, and so much to think and talk about, especially when it comes to AI in constructive dialogue. If you'd like to get in touch about perspectives with personalized practice or anything else, the email address to do that is growth@constructivedialogue.org. Look out for the email where we'll send out the recording and the slides for the next few days. And once again, thank you for spending this hour with us. Take care and have a good rest of your day.